Let's go over everything in Jael's tool belt other than her heart for God. Isolation, societal rejection, uncomfortable alliances, and cultural expectation, including hospitality and homemaking. What? How is God going to make a warrior out of this? Welcome to The Warrior Bride. I'm Autumn Woods, and today we're pulling spiritual wilderness survival tips from Jael, one of my all-time favorite Bible heroes. We're also going to examine how her story reveals Jael as a type and shadow of the messianic deliverance. When we last left off, Deborah and Barak were summoning the Israeli army on Mount Tabor to wage war against the evil commander Sisera and his infamous 900 chariots of iron. We learn in Judges chapter 5 that God struck the first blow against Sisera using his own creation. After sending his people to high ground on Mount Tabor, Yahweh caused a torrential rainstorm to pour over the land and overflow the river Kishon right where Sisera's chariots were stationed. Not so tough when we're stuck in the mud now, are we? The ranks of chariots were thinned by the mud and the flood. The very thing Israel feared the most about their enemy was the first thing God took out. As he often does when his people assemble in obedience, God made the first move to confuse and destroy the enemy so that his people could walk out the victory. Or run. There's a lot of ground to cover between Tabor and Harosheth Hagoyim, Sisera's hometown, where Barak's army pursued and struck down all the remaining Canaanites. Meanwhile, Sisera did not run home, knowing that that was the first place Barak would look for him. He fled on foot in the opposite direction to the tents of Heber the Kenite, an ally of King Jabin, and therefore himself. The Kenites were related to Israel by marriage. They were the descendants of Moses' father-in-law, not quite welcome to the party, but still treated with courtesy because of family connections. So they're outsiders to begin with. But Heber has isolated his household even further by pitching his tents outside Kenite land in Zenaim near Kadesh in the Galilee region, and by making friends with Israel's enemies. Little did Sisera know that God had laid a black ops trap for him in the tent of Heber's wife, Jael, Israel's secret ally. Remember that wilderness isolation sharpens your senses. You become more sensitive to the things of God and more aware of the schemes of the enemy. Between her husband's choices and Sisera's oppression, Jael had been removed from her tribe, then her Israelite neighbors, then from her own husband because of their different allegiances. She felt the spiritual loss of fellowship keenly, and she longed to see her community thrive again. But she had to be placed in this tight, uncomfortable situation that made her so sick of the circumstances that she would act accordingly with God's will when the time came. Jael listened to her husband praise Jabin and Sisera daily, and daily she chose to take a stand in her heart against the enemy. She practiced winning the victory so many times in the spirit that when the enemy showed up on her doorstep, she was ready, willing, and able to answer God's call in the natural. In order for God to sell Sisera into her hand, Jael had to be looking to buy. She even used his own curse against him. Because of Sisera, village life had ceased. No one was around. That meant there would be no one to intercede for him before God when Jael executed upon Sisera the judgment written.
It looks like you're out of ideas.
Quite.
Let's go over everything in Jael's tool belt other than her heart for God. Isolation, societal rejection, uncomfortable alliances, and cultural expectation, including hospitality and homemaking. What? How is God going to make a warrior out of this? In his infinite humor, God turned all of Jael's perceived weaknesses into strengths, and she partnered with him using what she had and what she was already skilled with. We've covered isolation. It created the perfect setting for her covert op. No witnesses, no interference. Another one of Jael's assets was societal rejection. Jael was an outsider, not quite welcome anywhere because of her background. On top of that, Jael was a woman, treated like property by the culture she lived in. Sisera underestimated Jael because she was a woman home alone. He dismissed her as weak, vulnerable, and compliant, which just reinforced her cover.
We know that you're in there, and that you're all alone.
Heber's unpopular alliance also gave Jael favor with Sisera that she wouldn't have had if he'd known the truth about her. Jael's loyalty was to God's people, the complete opposite of her husband's allegiance. But Sisera didn't know that. He thought she was Team Jabin, willing to take care of him so that he could go out and destroy the chosen people. Notice that Sisera didn't come barreling into Jael's tent like an entitled brat. She invited him. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord. Turn aside to me. Do not fear." She intercepted him. That implies that this was a premeditated plan between her and God. She was watching and waiting for this God-given opportunity. Culture dictated that guests should be given hospitality and shielded from harm. Jael needed to play Stepford in order for this plan to work. Before she could wield the tent peg and hammer, her weapons of choice were a welcoming smile, a fuzzy blanket, and spiked milk. Trust me, the milk she gave him was fermented. That's why he went to sleep so fast. By giving him this treat in a lordly bowl when he asked for water, she was bestowing on him something reserved for an honored guest. This would have put his wounded ego at ease and helped him relax into a false sense of security and sleep even faster. If she had come at Sisera in her full fury, it would have been a lot harder to lure him into God's trap. Jael had to lead with nurture and gentleness and then strike at the right time. Even Jesus did this. His first trip here was a covert ops rescue mission, and he needed to come in as the gentle, humble Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world so that the new covenant could be established before his return as the ferocious Lion of Judah and King of Kings. Speaking of ferocity, let's get to the final weapon in Jael's arsenal: homemaking. In nomadic society, it was the woman who literally made the home by pitching the tents. Jael was a DIYer who knew what all her power tools were for, and she was very proficient with a tent peg and hammer. I want you to pay close attention, because this is a lesson I'm already well versed in, and I would like you to learn it for free. When the opportunity came, Jael didn't run into her husband's tent to look for weapons she didn't know how to use. She didn't try to MacGyver something outrageous and anachronistic like a bazooka because she heard from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about that this is the solution to the problem. And she didn't listen to her culture's bias that said she was weak and helpless. She took the simple tools in her hands that she'd been using all her life, and like David with his sling and stones, she struck true and did not miss. With her tent peg and hammer, she destroyed Israel's oppressor and set captives free. God has given all of us things that we're good at, and they may seem little or stupid to us because they're second nature, or because we know someone who's capitalized on them and does them better, or at least makes more money doing them than we do. People may see those giftings in us and get excited because they know they're special and they want to help, but they want to put their spin on you to make you fit into their world. And it won't work. You won't shine as who God made you to be to your fullest if you have all that influence dimming you. If you've had too much of that from other people, God will take you into the wilderness to get you back to basics and realign you with the plans He has for you. If Jael had listened to her culture or to fear, she would have missed the God-orchestrated opportunity to make a big difference from her little corner of the world.
Give it back!
This is for my family!
I'll tear you to pieces!
And this is for you! Das Vidanya!
God promised that Sisera would be sold into the hands of a woman. A woman waging war and defeating a masculine enemy might seem surprising until you look back at the first messianic prophecy. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is an ongoing thing, even though victory has already been called. Women are naturally more sensitive to the spirit realm because God divinely tuned us to have enmity for the enemy of our souls. And once we figure out who that enemy is, it's Satan. We teach those in our charge to hate him too, and to watch for his schemes. Ultimately, Jesus came as the seed of the woman to defeat the serpent, but we see types and shadows of this event throughout Scripture as a reminder from God to us and the accuser. Jael's story is one of them. In the Song of Deborah, the prophetess sings, "Most blessed among women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Blessed is she among women in tents. He asked for water, she gave him milk. She brought out cream in a lordly bowl. She stretched her hand to the tent peg, her right hand to the workman's hammer. She pounded Sisera, she pierced his head. She split and struck through his temple. At her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead." What a pretty description of Jael's victory. Did you catch the first part of that? Most blessed among women. Who else does that describe? Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary and Jael are most blessed among women. Why? Because they were both vessels of God's deliverance. When Jael crushed Sisera's head with that hammer and peg, a generation of peace and freedom was birthed because she freed Israel from their horrible oppressor. Through Mary giving birth to Jesus, the Messiah, the snake crusher, came forth and crushed the enemy's head when he was nailed to the cross. Through his death and resurrection, Jesus conquered sin and death and the enemy, and he in turn birthed a new covenant of peace and reconciliation with God for anyone who chooses to accept him. And a key component in both of these plans was a woman who said yes to God regardless of the consequences. And through him, they overcame the enemy. That includes Deborah too. Because of her initial yes, the way was paved for Jael to say yes to God, and for Barak too. And because they obeyed God, he restored life to their community. May the Deborahs and Baraks and Jaels of today continue this legacy. That wraps up our Wilderness series. If you're finding value in this content, don't forget to like, sub, share, and hit the bell. New episodes drop Saturdays at 9 a.m. See you soon.